let's talk about why not having too much cash on hand is not the best strategy. I'll need you to help though. So don't put your finger over and. How do you know if you have too much cash on hand? Is there such a thing? If you're holding on to a lot of cash, you might want to consider the potential drag that that's having on your long-term wealth. While it's absolutely recommended to build up that emergency fund with about 6 months worth of expenses, let's talk about why having too much cash on hand might not be the best strategy. Now, the impulse to hang on to as much cash as possible is totally an understandable one, especially during times like we saw in 2020 or even in the past year. Cash offers a sense of security, and it can feel reassuring to accumulate more of it in challenging situations as a buffer against unexpected events. So let's talk about what is considered cash. Basically, it's any type of instrument in which you don't have to sell or redeem it to actually get the cash. Like if it takes that extra step, it's not liquid enough to be considered cash. So when we say cash, we're talking about a bank account, checking your savings, a CD, not as common anymore, or some type of extremely liquid type account. And we're not talking about physical cash under your mattress. I don't recommend hanging on to dollar bills as a form of saving, in case you're wondering. That said, it's possible to have too much cash. You should always have enough cash on hand to cover your expenses in a potential emergency. But beyond that, your high yield cash account should not be your only savings vehicle. The annual percentage yield, or APY, for high interest cash and savings accounts seldom keep up with the rate of inflation, meaning that if you're sitting on a pile of cash, it might be losing value. And this defeats the purpose of savings. So when you hoard cash, you do yourself and your financial goals a disservice. Instead, investing in a globally diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds, or ETFs, where your money can actually grow and get you closer to whatever you're saving for, might be a better option. Here are some signs that you might be holding on to too much cash and what you can actually do about it. Number 1, you're not sure how big your emergency fund should be. Now, it's important to have an emergency fund that can cover up to 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Now we're talking about groceries, rent, car bill, things like that. But if you're unsure of how much money you need saved for that so-called emergency, you might be holding a little bit too much cash. So what should you do? Well, when it comes to building the right emergency fund for your situation, in general, you should plan to have those 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. As we talked about, rent, groceries, phone bill, things like that. But once you've set aside your ideal emergency fund, you can stop worrying about having enough or not having enough in that sense. You gotta feel confident that you're ready for that rainy day once you achieve that emergency savings goal. And then think about potentially investing that extra cash. Number 2, you consistently have a cash balance in excess of your monthly expenses. The month is over and you've paid your bills. Hooray, congrats, that's awesome. And still, there's a bunch of cash sitting in your checking account. You have that emergency fund, but you have a bunch of cash left over in the checking account as well. Does this sound like you? If so, you might be holding on to a little bit too much cash. Any low or zero interest bank account should ultimately be viewed as a temporary holding tank for your money. Your money isn't working for you in these accounts, especially right now in low interest rate environments. It's just sitting there, honestly, working for your bank. So what should you do? Add up your monthly bills and expenses and get a feel for what that number actually is. In all likelihood, your spending is probably relatively consistent from month to month and falls within a probably predictable range, right? If you know what the high end of that range is, we suggest you commit to putting any cash over that amount that isn't part of your emergency fund to work. And when you put it to work, that's not in the checking or savings account. Number 3, you're always waiting for the right time to invest. Does that sound like you? If you know you want to invest, but find yourself hesitating to the point of not acting, whether you're wrestling with concerns about the stability of investments or indecision about how much money to put in place, totally understandable, but you can end up doing nothing while drowning in liquidity. What should you do? Take the plunge. There's no right time to start investing. You can't time the market, no one can. And you shouldn't try, trust me. Instead, consider a technique known as dollar cost averaging. You may have heard of it. This means investing a set amount of money at regular intervals in an automated fashion. You might, for example, decide to invest $500 every single month instead of investing a larger sum of money all at once. It's really your preference there. This way, you can avoid the risk of putting all your money in the market at the wrong time, if that's your concern, and minimize any regret you might feel if the market dips. So you may be watching this thinking, Is really having too much cash the worst thing? No, not at all. If you meet one of these situations and you probably consider yourself, hey, I have too much cash, it's not the worst thing ever, right? But I think it's really important to understand that internal inertia, that feeling of maybe I'll do it tomorrow, maybe I'll do it next week, at some point, that cash reduces your long-term wealth than the alternative of investing it or somehow putting it to work. Take the emotional aspect and put it aside and think rationally about that. In the end, you might be better off long-term by putting your money to work for you. All right, it's Tony from Wealthfront. Thanks again for joining. We'll see you next time. What's hilarious is there is a dollar bill stuck in front of the camera. Is it on camera?